911, what's your emergency?
We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. My daughter finally admitted that the baby's in the store.
I don't like the smell in the car. I'm being straight with you guys.
We didn't like the smell either.
Smell filled up the garage. Yeah, it hits you like a wave. I mean, it was whatever it was very potent.
You don't want me going in the trunk of the car.
There was a bag of pizza for, 12 days in the back of the car full of maggots. It stunk so bad. You know how hot it's been. That smell was terrible.
Well, I know none of this is true.
Okay, well,
I mean, I know that now it's not true, but at the time I believe it was true.
The day that she was born, after they got done cleaning my granddaughter up and stuff like that, who they hand her to was my wife, and my daughter is always
harbored ill feelings.
Yeah, there's been some toughness right there.
When I asked her why won't you allow us to see Caylee, and she said, well, maybe I'm a spiteful bitch.
I'm Jane Velez-Mitchell in for Nancy Grace. The road is getting narrower for top mom Casey Anthony tonight as the clock ticks down to a secret grand jury hearing reportedly set for next Tuesday. Could that result in a murder or a manslaughter indictment? Published reports quote a top investigator who plans to testify before the grand jury is saying even though there is no body, no crime scene, no murder weapon, no confession, no nothing, the totality of everything leads him to only one logical conclusion. He believes prosecutors will be able to prove that Casey killed her daughter, Caylee, although we have to stress she is not charged with that now. Casey's defense attorneys in court today fighting for evidence and winning over vocal objections of prosecutors who don't want to show their hand. Let's go out to Jessica D'Onofrio, who's been on top of the story from the very start, reporter for CNN affiliate WKMG. Tell us about this grand jury on Tuesday that's reportedly going to convene. I understand it's the last day of this grand jury, so how in the heck are they going to hear all this evidence when we're hearing witness after witness and all this evidence, the forensic evidence, the behavioral evidence? How are they going to cram that into one day and hope to come up with an indictment?
That's a very good question, Jane. It's going to be, there may be a lot of witnesses that this grand jury has to hear testimony from. But, going back to Jose Baez's request today to have Casey Anthony be able to visit these key points of interest in the case here, her days may be numbered, because if that grand jury actually decides that she should be charged with manslaughter or murder, she's going to go straight back to jail. And in that case, there really isn't a point there, and she won't be able to travel to any of these key points of interest.
Shannon Fox, family therapist and MomLogic.com contributor, the attorney for Casey Anthony, Jose Baez, reportedly said he's trying to prepare her for the worst. Well, you heard it right there. Tuesday, it could be very bad news for Casey. How do you prepare somebody for that?
That's a great question. Casey is one who hasn't shown any emotion at all. She hasn't shown any emotion at the disappearance of her daughter. And so now, when faced with potential homicide charges, she still seems pretty straight-faced. So it's tough to break through that shell and even prepare somebody for something that they don't seem to be emotionally invested in at all.
All right. Well, we've got so many phone calls coming in. Victor from Idaho, your question, sir.
My question is, if this goes to trial, could the defense bring up an insanity plea on this?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Let's bring in the defense attorney's Midwin Charles, Joey Jackson. So many experts have said we don't have the whole story. The prosecution is holding back on key evidence. Do you think, given everything you hear now and the possibility of X very incriminating being out there, that Midwin, I'll start with you, they should go for an insanity defense?
Well, I think that's going to be real difficult here, Jane. When you have an insanity defense, you basically first have to admit that you did it, right? I mean, that hasn't happened here yet. We don't even know exactly what happened, because in an insanity defense, the person says, you know what, I did do it, but when I did it, I was insane. In other words, I didn't know the difference between right or wrong. So I really don't know whether that'll happen here, but I will tell you this. She has not been acting like the normal mother. There's been no press conferences. There's been no crocodile tears. So there's clearly, possibly, a psychological issue here, and I'm sure her defense attorney is going to bring that out.
Well, Joey Jackson, a defense attorney, one investigator said in all his years, he has never come up with a person that he's had to deal with who is as tough as this individual in terms of maintaining a poker face. Now, that can work for her, and it can also work against her if hypothetically she were to go to trial on more serious charges.
It could, Jane, but what we have to understand is that everyone processes information differently and handles the information differently, and that's why I believe, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, that not having her in the courtroom was brilliant by Mr. Baez, because now you focus the judge on the issues and the motions and not on, oh, was she having a straight face, was she grinning, was she smiling, was she laughing, did she look confused, did she look disinterested, and that's why that was important. But with regard to the original issue of insanity, we're nowhere near establishing or even talking about an insanity defense or, a plea at this point.
Well, I think you make a very good point, because had she shown up in court, we'd all be talking about what she was wearing and
Exactly.
was she acting strange? Did she look at somebody cross-eyed?
Did she show up in pajamas?
Right.
Exactly. Well, that's Michael Jackson. That's another story entirely. All right. Listen, Felicia, Alabama, I understand you have a question, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Why is the judge not allowing the evidence from the cadaver dogs, considering they found a scent in Casey's trunk?
All right, well, let's go to Detective Lieutenant Stephen Rogers with Nutley, New Jersey Police Department. Judge said no to basically cross-examining the cadaver dogs. You cannot cross-examine dogs.
Yeah, that's correct. What he's saying actually is not to cross-examine the police officers who used those dogs. Now, why he did that, I don't know. But I can tell you this, that the police need not fear any motions by the defense attorney if they did a good job. And I believe the police in this case did a very meticulous, good job, and we're going to see an indictment for possibly murder next week.
I want to go back to Jessica D'Onofrio, reporter, CNN affiliate WKMG. You've been following this possible grand jury that we expect to begin, well, actually, it's the last day of the grand jury, but to begin to hear Casey Anthony's case on Tuesday. We're hearing that her father, her mother, and her brother might testify. We're hearing about all these witnesses. Do you really think that they're going to call the family to the stand? Because couldn't that put them in a bad squeeze if they changed their testimony from what they said originally that's on tape to investigators when they were first interviewed?
Well, quite possibly, Jane, but I mean, I do believe that they are going to call George Anthony to come and testify in front of that grand jury. I do believe they'll call Cindy, and I do believe that they'll call Lee. I mean, these are the people who were closest to her. These are the people who knew about her movements, who knew what she said in the past, and I am sure that the prosecution is going to want them to talk about that in front of this grand jury. So I am sure that they are going to be called. George, absolutely for sure. I heard he was told to clear his schedule for Tuesday so that he could be there.
All right, Midwood Charles, Joey Jackson, what if the dad, who's clearly been so upset, understandably, at everything that's gone on in his life, I mean, basically this has wrecked his life, gets up there and says, I don't want to testify. What happens then, Midwood?
Very difficult. I mean, it's going to be one of those things where he can possibly be held in contempt of court. They could go in and introduce his prior testimony to the police and, say, hey, you said this back then. What do you mean you're not willing to testify here? There are a whole bunch of variables here. I mean, at the end of the day, Jane, this is a family that just has been ripped apart by what has happened here. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. You just see video right there of George throwing things because he's just fed up. And who can judge? I mean, if we were in their shoes, how would we act? We don't know. Right. But, Joey, do you expect that he will testify cooperatively?
Well, I don't know how cooperatively it'll be, but judging from all the things that have occurred and the statements he's made with respect to the trunk and all the information that he's provided, it would suggest that he would go in there and tell the grand jury his story. The grand jury will indict. As Sol Wachtler has said, former Chief Judge of New York, a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich.
It just seemed like, from our perspective, all it seemed like from day one, you guys are building a case against Casey as a murderer. She's not a murderer. One thing I know is she loves that child.